Hello, and welcome back, everyone, to another episode of the Precision Personal Training Podcast. This is episode 56, and today we've got a guest that I've really been looking forward to sitting down and chatting with. In today's world, it feels like everyone has an opinion when it comes to fitness. Social media is full of conflicting advice, influencers quoting studies, and people telling you the best way to train, eat, or recover. But today's guest is someone who lives in both worlds. He's a coach, researcher, and holds both a bachelor's honours and a PhD in sports science. He's published multiple research papers around injury prevention, concussion management, and performance, while also working directly with people to improve their health and performance. What I'm really excited about today is bridging the gap between what science actually says and what works in the real world. We're going to chat about coaching, research, injury prevention, concussions, longevity, and hopefully clear up some of the biggest misconceptions in the fitness industry. Ayrton, welcome to the Precision PT podcast. It's great to have you on. And just for anyone who doesn't know you or your work, you need a background to yourself.
Yeah, of course. So Carlo man originally, been living in Galway most of my adult life. I did my BSc in Sports and Exercise Science at ATU Galway. And then from there, followed that up with a PhD looking at concussion in amateur female sport. Outside of that, I've been a personal trainer for roughly 8 years, an S&C coach for about 4 years now. I'm just heading into my fourth season as the lead S&C coach with Galwegians men's rugby. It's been pretty much dipping my toe in and out of every part of sports science imaginable. And I'm actually in Canada at the minute, moving back to Galway now in 2 weeks. So it looks like there's a bit of sun shining on you there. So hopefully I come back to that sort of weather when I get back.
No, we'll see. We'll see. I think it's for about 4 days and then it's gone. Usually the
Yeah,
case here.
sounds about right.
So look, for starters, what made you want to do a PhD in what you chose to do? Was there previous experience, or did you find there was a gap there that needed to be studied more?
The decision to do a PhD was to start, there was a few different reasons. There was COVID. So there was a bit of what the hell do I do with myself now? I definitely felt like I had more in me after I finished my original degree. So I was looking for something to kind of fill that gap and give me, I suppose, a purpose. And then it was more so the opportunity to delve into concussion came from the head of the School of Science at ATU Galway is a researcher by the name of Dr. Lisa Ryan. And then there's another research, Dr. Ed Daly, who do a lot of work with concussion. And they have a research center there. And they're both from a rugby background, so they've obviously had a lot of personal experience with it, either coaching or through sport themselves. And I would have had experience with them going through my university degree, and they were good people to work under, and so they saw the gap in terms of how concussion, the research that's there for female athletes, and then particularly amateur sport. When I first started looking at the topic before the interview, I'll be honest, I didn't have a clue about it. And then as the more I started to read and kind of put the pieces together, I realized this was very important work. And I wanted to be the person to try and bridge the gap between where the research and the practice was and where it could go and where it should go for athletes, I suppose.
What was the ins and outs of that whole process? If you can go into detail there on that, like, are you picking random selection, or are you going into like Galwegians, these places, and going through any of these groups that have had concussions previous, or how does that actually work for anyone that doesn't know?
Yeah, so the project itself had what's called a mixed methods design, where I'm looking at raw data, and then I'm also doing qualitative research where I'm speaking to people and getting their experiences. So the project, the first thing I did was I went and tried to find all the research I could on how many concussions were happening in female sport. The spoiler there is outside of like collegiate studies in the US where there's a lot of money. There's not that much concussions being reported in female sport because there's not medical resources there. If you go and try to do a study like that in Ireland, there isn't physios in female sport quite often, or there's volunteers working with the athletes. So there's a lack of research being done in the female athletes themselves. So that's problem one. We're not seeing the full picture because there's not the individuals or the funding there to capture that picture. From there, we know from the research, and why my research was funded was that female athletes are more likely, maybe more likely to get a concussion in the same sport as a male. They may take longer to recover from that concussion, and then they may also have worse symptoms from that as well. So that's, I suppose, problem two. And the main problem I wanted to highlight and wanted to find out more about in my research, and we can discuss a bit more about it, is that there is return to play protocols for bringing an athlete back after a concussion. I don't know, have you had any exposure to them before? Would you know anything about them?
No.
That is generally the answer I get from people. And so I sat down with coaches of female athletes and physiotherapists and people who would work with those athletes and should have an awareness of those protocols. And quite often they didn't, or they had a general idea, but they didn't actually know. The guidelines were there, they were really good, they were well designed maybe, but they weren't being given to the people, the end users, the athletes and the coaches who should know and should be provided the training and experience to be able to look after their athletes with that. So yeah, that was kind of the picture that I was trying to paint, and that came up through my research. And then from there, I was working with eye tracking technology to see could we find a way for people in amateur sport to be able to diagnose concussions and then track the recovery from it. Because in fairness, volunteer coaches in sport do incredible work. I think it's unfair that they should have all responsibility to look after what is a brain injury. So the more we can lean on technology and other tools and other supports for them to be able to support their athletes and take the responsibility off them, I think is a really good thing. So yeah, start that process. There's a lot more work to be done until we get to the point where there is a tool like that that can help those athletes. But yeah, that's pretty much what my project was. As much as anything, it was highlighting the need to better support female athletes, but that's pretty much the same if you pick any topic in female sport.
Yeah, and then just sticking on the concussions, is like, is there a protocol that you're talking about there that you can even elaborate on? Like, what's the recovery process look like for these ladies when they do obviously get diagnosed with concussion, just so people can even know going forward?
Yeah, so the way that works is that there is the guidelines for most of the sports that we have here in Ireland come from a group called the Concussion and Sport Group. They're basically a group of experts in sport and health, and they come together every few years and they come up with where's the research now, what is the best thing to do. And so the general guidelines are for the initial 24 to 48 hours after a concussion, you will be resting. We generally don't advise resting beyond that point, even if you're experiencing symptoms, because it's just going to delay your recovery. So what we're looking for then in stage two is trying to get back to your gradual day-to-day activities, getting back into work and school. And that can be a transition that might need to be a gradual transition, depending on how that kind of exacerbates your symptoms, whether it's the headaches, the dizziness, the sensitivity to light, whatever that is. And from there, you're going to slowly try and reintroduce aerobic exercise, slow control, straight line running. Can we get you to slowly get back into some level of physical activity without, again, over exacerbating those symptoms? From there, we'll start to bring in some sport-specific skills. So let's say it's a rugby athlete, that could be simple drills like passing the ball, catching, that sort of thing. And they are low kind of cognitive load skills where there's not that much thinking involved, there's not that much processing, because again, your brain is still going through that recovery, and the more you have to think and concentrate, the more we're probably going to be poking the bear. If we can do that, and that should be around realistically around probably a 2 week mark into your recovery. If we can get to that point then, and you're medically cleared to return to training, let's start reintegrating non-contact drills in your sport, then build it into your full contact training. And if we can get realistically, if we can get a full week or two of full contact training, then we should be good to return to your sport as long as we don't have the symptoms, as long as you've been medically cleared. And so it's very much a gradual process of basically not throwing you in the deep end straight away, but building you up slowly, seeing how that affects your symptoms, and then making sure that you're fully recovered before you go back into your sport. And particularly with that last part, and the most important part is that return to full training, because from my experience, quite often it will tell you the truth, because athletes will always tell you they're okay and they're great because there's a match coming up. And part B, the ones that don't do that will actually be quite nervous and maybe even more dangerous going into their tackles because they're hesitant, and because there's a bit of fear there. So there's a bit of a psychological factor, and that will only become clear when you throw them into the chaos of a full training session. Yeah, so that's the general process. I will say one of my studies looked at all the guidelines in all the sports across Ireland, and there's huge variation there. There was new guidelines that came out in, I'm going to say 22, 23. However, some Irish organizations put up a PDF maybe 10 years ago, and that's the same PDF that's there now. So there is a gap there in terms of what the best guidance is now versus what's being provided. And again, a PDF and a website in Ireland isn't going to change what happens in a local village in Ireland either. So look, that's a resourcing issue. That is the issue with volunteer organizations. They're struggling to make ends meet. They're struggling to do the basics. And that's why they need the support of researchers and organizations to help bridge that gap and look after our athletes better than we are currently doing. Yeah.
You obviously have immersed yourself in education, which is class. And like obviously from chatting to you before this, you're passionate about the craft. Social media obviously plays a massive role in fitness day to day. I had to laugh at you saying you have the DMs muted for your own sanity at times. I'd be the same with some of the cold DMs. But look, social media now, there's so much information out there. It's an absolute minefield. In your experience, you've obviously immerse yourself in education. Why do you think people are so confused still nowadays, even just trying to improve their health and well-being?
There's so many different reasons for it. You have people with, let's say, influencers or even practitioners with an incredible level of confidence. Like me as a researcher, I know what I know, but I also know what I don't know. And I think that's really important. If you try something once and it works, that doesn't mean it will work for everyone all of the time. And it's that false sense of confidence that makes people produce false claims on the internet. You also have influencers and content creators. Their job is to create content. So they have to put something up. So if they're trying to get engagement and they're trying to grow their presence online, they'll put something up, whether they believe in it or not, or whether they have done any research into why it should be done. There's less money put towards making credible claims than there is people making outlandish claims for a fee, let's say. So quite often that's what we're seeing when we see stuff on social media. It's purely to sell you something. It's not to actually educate people and bring them on the journey. It's to try and pull them in, engage them, even if it's particularly if it's something they haven't seen before, it's controversial. If you can sell them the story that this hasn't worked for you before, this may work for you, it's worth giving it a try. And if it's influencers who those people believe, then that's what they're going to go for. And that's what it is really. There's financial backing and there's financial incentive for people to sell you something, whether they believe it or not, versus people who are doing it because it's the right thing to do. What I would say is like, I knew you were going to ask me this question, and I have a list of the people who I would hang my hat on. So I can tell you now, or I can send you on a list of people I would, yeah, but back in the industry or people who have brought me along their journey, and I would trust them a lot.
No, go for it. Because like that, I have questions here asking who helped you along the way. So shout.
Yeah, so I think the first person who I was like, they combined research and coaching together really effectively, and they're now gone from being a coach, being a physiotherapist, to being a doctor. Is Gary McGowan? Have you ever
Yeah,
heard of Skinny Gaz? Yeah. So if you're looking for anything health science related, he's your guy. Another really great person is Dr. Peter Tierney. So he's worked with Leinster Rugby, he's worked with the English FA.
he was on the podcast.
Oh, well, there you
Yeah,
go.
yeah.
There you go. I'll have to go back and give that one a listen. He actually worked for Lululemon as well, over here as well back in the day. So, yeah, great dude. Probably one of the people I'd be most jealous of in terms of how they create like accessible stuff on social media. If you like, I've sent my missus endless amounts of his infographics and stuff like that because he really does communicate things really well. If you're looking for really good S&C content in terms of stuff that you can bring into your own training, if this is other coaches listening here, Lachlan Wilmot and Jordy Taylor, Athletes Authority.
Hmm.
There we go. Yeah, really great lads that I've definitely pulled a lot for when I'm working with my own athletes. And another person I've done that with is David Gray Rehab.
Yeah,
If you come across him as
the
well.
ACL guy.
Yes, yeah. So pretty much any injury that lad would be able to take you through the whole way. And then look, I don't want to go too much more. There's only two others. If you're looking for personal training and health, I suppose guidance, Larry Doyle is someone, even for setting up a coaching business, if you're trying to build a business, I think he's a really good person to follow. And then if you're looking for information or mentorships, Sportsmith do really good S&C and coaching materials. And then the Sports Mentorship Hub, I've actually just in the last 2 months taken on a mentor for the first time. I was very much self-taught throughout my coaching career, and so I was like, it's time to upskill and find someone to show me their way of doing things and challenge me a small bit. So yeah, if you ever want to take on a mentor, the Sports Mentorship Hub is a really great place. You can find someone in any field, whether that's a coach, whether it's actually, I think Dr. Peter Tierney's on there, whoever it may be. And it's a small fee every month, and you can meet up, shoot shit with them, and learn a thing or two along the way. So yeah. There's always going to be snake merchants online, so it's really about finding the people who can provide value and aren't trying to sell you something every week.
So would you say like a green flag for a coach is providing content, like let's say free, valuable content, not constantly guerrilla marketing, sales tactics, all the time, or let's say talking in absolutes as well? Because I think when you're dealing with individuals, it's so contextual now. Like you have to listen to the person in front of you and then make decisions based off that, not like X worked for me, so X is going to work for you in 6 weeks, or these kind of outlandish claims.
That's it. Like, and don't get me wrong, there's stuff that would pull me in and be like, oh, that's really interesting. I've never seen that before. And then two or three research checks, and then you're like, okay, that's not it. And that doesn't mean I need to go read academic papers. That means if I see a particular product, if I go search that on Instagram and I see 20 other people also producing videos about this topic, then it's probably a topic that someone is pushing for monetary value. Um, if it's a piece of technology or a piece of kit, if you want two words from science that we use, I will always just, let's say it's a Whoop band for your health tracking. If you look up the reliability and validity of it, straight away online, it will tell you how accurate that is. And it's just a really quick metric that you can look at quickly and go, how consistent is this piece of kit and how consistent or how accurate is it in testing what it should be testing. So they're always the two things I will do. And then if someone is consistently trying to sell me something, then that's time to unfollow. Yeah.
Yeah. So then, yeah, when did you start personal training? How many years ago now?
God, it was, I think I got my certification maybe in 2018, 2019. Yeah, I think it was 2018 I started. So 8 years ago. Yeah.
So have you seen a massive change in fitness industry? personal training, online coaching through the years now since you started out?
There's always the next big thing, but I think there has been a lot of positive changes, particularly for coaches and clients in terms of how personal training was set up. I think looking back to when I started, there was a lot of one-to-one personal training, and a lot of what coaches were delivering was essentially bodybuilding, whether they knew it or not. It was whatever Arnold would have done back in the day was given to your client, whether it was a male or female, no matter what their goal was, it was like, let's just do as much stuff as possible and see what happens. Thankfully, we have moved away from that. The growth of semi-private personal training is a really positive thing where the industry has basically given a gym ability to have more clients and be able to fill more slots, given clients a way to access cheaper personal training, and then adding in the value of creating community in coaching environments as well. The more we can connect people in their training, the more we can motivate them, the more we can make it feel less like a chore. And to be fair, something other coaches have said to me as well, and it is absolutely true. The more you work to one-to-one clients, you'll either become best friends with them or you'll run out of things to talk about. And so the more I can, you know yourself, coaching can be quite intensive. Sometimes you just need some quiet time, and the more I can make other people bounce off each other and find connections, the less I need to be engaged with it, and I can just focus on providing the most value with my coaching with them. So there are definitely two or three big things. I think the growth of Hyrox is probably the next big thing in the industry, and that is something I think CrossFit was always something I wouldn't say I was against, but I saw it as being like contraindicated or not recommended for a lot of people because of how dynamic it was and how challenging it was. And I think Hyrox has found a way to provide a similar atmosphere, provide a competitive environment, to give people who train in gyms something to work towards without making it too complicated or making it inaccessible to a lot of people. And I think that's something that it wasn't until I got over here that I started coaching Hyrox and I got to see the value of it. Again, that's something where you can deliver it in a group and connect people as much as possible. And so I think that's where we're going. We're going from, we probably went through the one-to-one era. We then went through the online coaching era where everyone wanted to be an online coach. And now we're moving into, and I think it's probably a consequence of COVID that people are looking to be more connected in their training and find a community where they feel at peace. And I think that's a really positive development where we can move people towards not being alone, because the more we develop technology and the more we interact with screens, I think the more we need to find a reason to interact with people more. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And I think then it leads into one of the next questions I had for you, which obviously from CrossFit, I like the injuries from that or potential of injuries from that was massive because of how hard it was. I think the barrier to entry for Hyrox is a lot more beginner friendly. But when it comes to injuries, is there a way to, let's say, prevent them from happening, or are we just trying to reduce the chances? Like, are we breaking it down to load management, the actual how much volume you're doing across the week? These are all things that do you think people should be considering a lot more if they don't have a coach? Should they be asked themselves in their own training, in their own programming, going through their training in the future?
Definitely injuries are a part of not just training but existence. You could never train a day in your life and try pick flowers in your garden and pull a muscle. Like that's the reality of being a human being. As much as we've evolved, we're still quite frail at heart. So it moves then from preventing injuries to preventing the risk of injuries. We can only ever try reduce the risk of them happening. The way I say it, there's some very logical steps, and it's something I always have to drill into my athletes when I work with them. And I know as soon as I start, so my first week at home, I'll be straight back into preseason with my Galwegians players, and injuries do happen quite often in preseason. And the first thing is much like the return to play protocol I gave you for rugby there. It's not diving in the deep end straight away. If you haven't trained in a while, if you're not regularly training, not spiking your training load out of nowhere. If you do that, your body's not going to like you very much. So being logical and building up the intensity of your training is the single easiest way to not injure yourself. It's also going to reduce the risk of your training negatively impacting your life. Like, who wants to wake up and scream as they get out of bed because their joints are inflamed? It just doesn't make sense. And over time as well, it'll make you less likely to want to go train if you're jumping in spontaneously, doing a lot of stuff where your body's going to be in pain for days afterwards, or you're going to be really stiff. So, not spiking your training load, step one. Looking at the bigger picture as well, and not to go, you need to have a sports nutritionist and you need to control everything as much as possible, but making sure you're properly fueling yourself for your sport. And that means, okay, yes, getting enough protein in throughout your day. So, a really easy target to start is whatever you weigh, multiply it by 1.5. There's a really easy protein target to get you started. And then making sure you have enough carbohydrates to fuel your training, because if you're not doing that, your body's going to have to find that energy from somewhere, whether that's breaking down your muscle or whatever that may be. So making sure you're fueling yourself appropriately. And then from there, like, again, it's a pretty logical thing to do, but making sure you're getting enough sleep. Sleep hygiene is a super simple thing that probably does show a bit of immaturity in a lot of us, in terms of not having a consistent bedtime. Like, we were taught that as kids, and some of us, when we become adults, just started letting it go out the window. If you can have a consistent sleep schedule, then you know where you're working with. Then you know if I need to increase my sleep time, or my duration, and your body will be more likely to want to sleep if it knows that at the same time every day, that's when we're going to go to bed. Screen time in bed, maybe don't do that. It's like, again, they're all really logical things that you can do to reduce that risk. A big one, I suppose, for the gym that I always have discussions with clients, and I make sure it's a rule in my programming for the athletes I work with, but some exercises just aren't for you. If you have a client that has had lower back pain, they don't need to deadlift if they feel uncomfortable with that movement. They don't need to RDL. They don't need to load their spine in a back squat. Like, that's okay. If you have a good enough coach, or to be honest, even if you don't have a coach, there's plenty of resources online that will show you an alternative exercise. Like, what is your goal? Is your goal to generally get stronger? There are hundreds of leg exercises that can get you to that. So if you feel an exercise brings on pain or discomfort for you, or has injured you more than once in the past, like, what is the benefit of going with that exercise again if there is a suitable alternative? Don't get me wrong, I'd love to have a crazy sexy back squat, but I know if I do that, my lower back in 2 to 3 sessions will start to be inflamed. So it's just not the movement for me. And that is a bit of, and probably links to injury risk reduction as well, but not having an ego when you train, not trying to go all out, not trying to prove anything to anyone. The more you do that, the more you're going to push the limits and take risks that are going to negatively impact you in the long term.
But I think that's an important point where, like, let's say you being on top of the guys' data now coming into preseason, because they're obviously going to be raring to go. These lads want to make the most progress as they can in the shortest period of time and be pitch ready. So if they're going in with big ego ready to rock, do you find like you nearly need to be like, whoa, like take 2 steps back to keep moving forward in this session? And do you feel like, let's say, managing that data is something to empower you and it's not necessarily something to be afraid of? Because I think people wake up, they look at their Apple Watch or their Whoop, and they're like, oh, my score is off, and they're nearly scared because they hear other people talk about data influence their training and their decision making in that regard as well.
Yeah, like, when it comes to, let's say, I'll deal with that in 2 parts. When it comes to the preseason and what athletes want to do and what they think they can do, um, I will have a general idea at the start of preseason what most of my players what their previous one rep max would be, or they will have an idea of that. I will take a note of that, but I actually don't care. I want to see you will have it with maybe some of your clients as well, where you have a pretty good idea of what they're able to lift generally. But some days they come in and they look tired or they look distracted, and you go, that's not where you are today. You are not that person today. And so I will have athletes who are, I see in the story now, they're on their holidays, they're on a beach somewhere. Are they realistically going to have the same one rep max as when I last saw them? Probably not. So I think making sure they prove to you in the moment that they can do that. So let's say it's a one rep max test. You're not jumping in the deep end straight away. What's something you know you can do? Let's get the confidence that I know and you know you can, and then we can build from there. And so it's very much, I will definitely pull my athletes back because I would rather have an uninjured athlete than have a really strong athlete. They're no use to me if they can't be on a pitch. So I'm always trying to pull them back. Bar the exception of, and you will always know that there will be some that as soon as they see you on the pitch putting out the cones for some of the longer runs, they will tell you that they have a little niggle or something's on or they didn't sleep last night. And that's where, as a coach, you have to get to know your clients over time. And okay, sometimes you give benefit of the doubt, but sometimes they or a club are paying you to be a coach, and so you have a duty to them and the people that are paying you to challenge those people a small bit when they're maybe inside their head a little bit too much. Definitely, it was something I was thinking about, and I figured it might come up in a conversation. But definitely looking at the wearables and that sort of data, I do think for a lot of people, like unless you're an elite athlete, a lot of that data is pretty irrelevant to you and is probably not providing value in your life. For a lot of people, waking up and seeing a stress score or seeing heart rate variability or their sleep score being affected may bring on anxiety with those people, even if they feel great before they looked at their phone or looked at their Apple Watch. Don't get me wrong, there is time and place to use that sort of data, but if you wake up and you feel great, then I think disregard that. Like I think if you have a wearable, whether it's whether it's Apple Watch or a ring, whatever that may be, really do ask yourself, has it advanced your training or your lifestyle in any way? If you look at your sleep score and it's genuinely something that you or working with your coach you've been able to influence and change, then by all means keep using it. If it's something that wakes up and makes you feel bad about yourself because you have had bad sleep, then that's probably not something, if it's not going to drive any change, I don't think it helps you in any way to consistently look at it and feel bad about yourself. Because you're clearly not in a position to change that behavior yet. So I don't think making yourself feel bad is going to help that situation in any way. So for a lot of people, okay, if you're making the change, cool, but really do ask yourself that question if you are using wearables in your day-to-day training.
It leads into just my last and final question for you is if someone did want to improve their health and well-being over the next 6 to 12 months, is there any big rocks that you would like them to cover straight away from the get-go and without kind of sweating the small stuff like the wearables? Because again, they're just such a small piece to a bigger puzzle.
As much as research is always growing and developing, the big rocks are always there. Although the US tried to put a spin on some of it recently, like we were taught the food pyramid as a kid. That's still probably one of the best nutrition resources we have out there. One thing when we're talking about social media is like supplements are pushed for so much. If you can have variety in your diet, if you can hit your five a day, if you're thinking about supplementation, like beyond a multivitamin, some creatine, some omega-3s, and getting at least 25 grams of fiber in, like once you do that, you're covering pretty much most of your big rocks when it comes to your nutrition. Okay, again, that 1.5 grams of protein if you're going to be resistance training. I think they're definitely like basic nutrition guidelines that you can follow. If you're thinking about your physical activity, the national guidelines are about 30 minutes of activity 5 days a week. As busy as we are in our life, I think if you can't find 30 minutes 5 days a week to do something, And it doesn't need to be a really intense session, but if it can be a brisk walk, at least, like if you can't find 30 minutes to do that, I think you need to have a serious reevaluation of your life. Even if you have kids, there are ways, maybe parents take turns, maybe it's bring the kids for a walk, bring them along for the journey. Like there, we have to find ways to be able to do at least 30 minutes. Looking at resistance training, 2 sessions a week, 90 to 120 minutes in total throughout the week. I think if you can do that, that's going to be such a big rock and a big contributor to your long-term health. If we can just get the minimum of the aerobic activity and 2 days of strength training, that's going to help your mortality, how long you live. It's going to help your morbidity, whether you develop arthritis, heart disease, diabetes. Because I can tell you, doing the physical activity now is going to be so much better than having to deal with those conditions and then have to do physical activity to stop them getting worse. And the big determinants of our mortality and how long we live are going to be those physical activity. It's going to be our bone mineral density, our muscle mass, how much lean mass we keep as we age, and something as simple as your grip strength. How long you keep your grip strength as you age. They're like it's just very, very clear that if you can do the bare minimum in your physical activity, and again, not try optimize, forget your trackers, forget everything else, do the bare minimum, and it's really going to pay dividends for your long-term health and your long-term range and aging. The more we look on social media, the more complicated people make it. Um, but if you do the bare minimum of looking at your food pyramid and hitting the basic physical activity guidelines, it's going to help you age healthier. It's going to set a good example for our kids when we get around to that point in our life, when we find time outside of coaching. And ultimately, it's going to give a much better society if we can all take a step in that direction.
Class. Ayrton, you shared some great insights today, and I appreciate it. Thank you. And thank you for coming on the podcast. Just before we wrap up, how can people find you? Social media, website, leave all your handles down here.
Yeah, so my Instagram is Ayrton Health. LinkedIn is Ayrton Walshe for the professionals. And if you are curious about any of my concussion research or want to look into that anymore, you will find all my research published on ResearchGate, or if you just look on Google, you'll find my research published on there as well. But yeah, any questions on anything I suppose we've discussed today, reach out to myself or Kyle. And yeah, thanks for listening.
Thank you, Ayrton. Catch you in the next one.